Coming up next on Passion Struck.
It's never failed to amaze me how you can have a conversation with someone and you think they're completely understanding what you're saying, and then they walk away with a completely different take on what it is you're saying, right? One of my favorite quotes is by George Bernard Shaw, which says, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it is taking place.
Welcome to Passion Struck. Hi, I'm your host, John R. Miles, and on the show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of the world's most inspiring people and turn their wisdom into practical advice for you and those around you. Our mission is to help you unlock the power of intentionality so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you're new to the show, I offer advice and answer listener questions on Fridays. We have long-form interviews the rest of the week with guests ranging from astronauts to authors, CEOs, creators, innovators, scientists, military leaders, visionaries, and athletes. Now, let's go out there and become Passion Struck. I am so excited today to welcome Clint Padgett to Passion Struck. Welcome, Clint.
Thank you for having me, John. Happy to be here.
Man, it's great to see you again, and thank you for having me on your great show as well. I truly appreciate the support.
No, it was a great interview. I'm glad I was able to do it.
Clint, I like to start these things out by giving the audience some background on the guest. You grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and I understand that your entrepreneurial spirit was in part shaped by helping your father run his small business. I was hoping you might be able to talk about that and how these experiences helped shape your approach to intentionality and teamwork later in your career.
So it's interesting. Sometimes one backs into a situation that one says they want to get out of, right? So I was born and raised in Orangeburg, which is a small town between Columbia and Charleston. And my dad was a serial entrepreneur who was always starting businesses. He was a visionary and not always the best in execution. So we did a lot of that. And I remember thinking as I was growing up, I don't like this whole entrepreneurial thing. I think I'd rather just punch a clock and get paid by the man every week and have to agree about this. But what ended up happening was the entrepreneurial bug did bite me and ended up pursuing that and being an entrepreneur myself. But I think what that did for me growing up with that situation, because my dad did have so many different businesses. It was gas stations. I was pumping gas when I was in second grade. I wasn't tall enough to check oil when I was pumping gas and washing windows and making change way before we had electronic cash registers, doing all that kind of stuff. We had a liquor store, a beer store, a pool hall, a construction company, you name it. And so what that did was that introduced me to many different types of people from many different backgrounds. And my background was fairly poor growing up. But I also got to hang out and meet people who's doctors and lawyers' kids. And it just taught me that no matter what title you have in life, people matter. And whatever role you're in, whether that's washing the windows or removing caulk or being a surgeon, you have a role to play. And I found that I really enjoyed meeting people, hearing their backstory, and learning who they were, learning what their background was, and then having that conversation with them helped me understand how people are and how they really matter. And that became the focal point of what I do now, which is project management per se, but I also focus on the people side of project management and how conversations are so important to us.
Yeah, and I want to dive into that whole concept of mattering, especially why our need to matter is so important in the work environment, because I think it has a lot to do why so many people feel unfulfilled and disengaged with what they're doing. But I like hearing about people's backstories, and you and I are both Navy veterans. Thank you for your service.
Same to you.
If my research is correct, you spent about 6 years on an aircraft carrier. That's what I remember from our discussion.
Yes.
And similar to the question,
longer. It was only 6 years, but it felt longer.
Man, I have a funny story to tell you that I didn't remember the first time that we talked. I'm on the Saratoga on its farewell voyage, and I get assigned to the Admiral's staff. And I'm the representative from the National Security Agency who's working for the Admiral. And you can imagine the security clearances. Well, they can't find me a berthing on this ship. And as we're talking 5,000 people, it shouldn't be too difficult to find a berthing. So I go into the berthing that they assigned me. And when I open the door, cigarette smoke pours out of it, which you don't do on a ship. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And as I walk in, I start hearing Ace of Base playing and see all these guys dancing around wearing barely any clothes. And they were all officers on an exchange program from Tunisia. So I'm like, and I'm like, I couldn't in any realm of possibility imagine that this was going to happen. And I ended up having to live with them for about 2 weeks, and they never stopped playing Ace of Base, and they never stopped asking me when we were going to get more shipments of Levi jeans in so they could buy them for their family members. Anyway, I digress.
That's awesome.
So for me, as we discussed, the Navy really has played a pivotal role, both in leadership and also teamwork. How did it help shape you as a young man?
I think for me, what was really interesting is growing up in that small town, never having left the state of South Carolina until I was 18 and joined the Navy. It was eye-opening to go from knowing everybody's name, knowing everybody and their brother, literally and their brother and or their sister. My high school graduating class had 52 people in it. And so it was a very small school that I went to. And I knew everybody and their brothers and sisters and family members. And then getting on a ship and leaving not only the state, but the country and going to a different place and realizing that how lucky we are in the way that we have it in the US and in going to other countries and really understanding who they were as well. Because even then I had this mentality of people matter. And I remember vividly one of my shipmates, we were in France, and he was upset because the waiter wasn't speaking English. And I'm like, you do know you're in France, right? That's not their language. Maybe we should try to speak French. And so that was just one of the things that clued me into the fact that other people think their country's the greatest in the world too. And they should. That's where they're from. That's where they're born. That's what they should think. But then a lot of places think we're the greatest. That's why they keep trying to come here, right? So we're a great melting pot. But I just found that going overseas and seeing the way that some people have to live their life, and then realizing that even though I grew up poor, I still had 4 walls around me called a trailer, right? At some point in my life, that was still better than what they have, a cardboard box. So it just expanded my horizons. It really showed me that A, I am growing up in the greatest country in the world, and B, there are others out there that have their own values and but they're also their own drawbacks.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that I think everyone at some point in their time who lives in America should have to travel overseas, because when you see places like I've been in Tunisia, Morocco, India, etc., you completely see a different way of life, and it makes you feel so gratified for everything that we have here that we take for granted.
Absolutely.
So getting out of the Navy, you decided that wasn't your calling, and you ended up getting into Georgia Tech, where you pursued a degree in electrical engineering. How did that technical education start shaping your perspective on balancing technical skills with the interpersonal relationships that had forged so much of your beginning up until that point?
So I think what's interesting is a little bit of the backstory in that I knew I wanted to be an electrical engineer from the time I can remember. So I remember going right into the library and checking out books on robotics and lasers. And this was late 70s. So this is way before that was a popular thing. My high school senior year, I did a project using a laser to create a hologram. I made a phone call, which my parents would not kill me for because it cost so much money. But I called England and talked to the first doctor who did the in vitro fertilization and actually got him on the phone. And I'm a 17-year-old kid from the US, right? But I always knew I wanted to be an electrical engineer. That was the thing that really drew me. And I go in the Navy, and I'm an electrician's mate on the aircraft carrier. So I'm working on electrical equipment, not theory stuff, really practical application. And I remember working on machines and thinking, why in the world do they put this part that always fails in the back? This person clearly has never worked on one. They did the design. So then I got out, and I like to joke that there's probably no greater motivation to go to college and to work in a shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia in December, January, which is exactly what I did when I got out of the Navy. I went to work at a shipyard. And if you're not familiar with Norfolk, Virginia, it can be quite chilly in the winter. And the wind is coming off the water, slicing right through you. I'm laying in the bilge of these boats, running electrical cables. And I'm like, yeah, this is definitely not for me. There's got to be something better to do in my life than this. And so I was lucky enough to get into Georgia Tech and get that double E degree and then become a practicing electrical engineer. But early on in my career, I went to work at Coca-Cola and I got to start working on projects. I really began to love it. Of course, I'm drawn to the technical side of things. I love 2+2. I always joke that there's a reason I became an engineer and not a literature major. And that's because I loved looking in the back of the book and confirming that 2+2 was indeed 4, that validation. And I don't like literature majors. I mean, I didn't want to be a literature major because I remember being scarred for life on the essay exam. And when I was in high school, with the essay question was, please describe the significance of the color red in The Great Gatsby. And having not read the book at 16, I had no idea, right? So that just petrified me. So I like the technical aspect of things. And then working for a really long time on different projects, I found that everybody's happy to talk about process. Process is activity A takes 5 days, followed by B takes 5 days, followed by C takes 5 days, total 15 days. That's great. But Joe, Jill, and Sue do activities A, B, and C. And you have to work with them differently because they're motivated differently. They speak different technical languages. You have the salespeople who don't speak the same language as the engineers, the technical people, and vice versa. And I found myself gravitating more and more towards people is the missing link here. People are the key. Microsoft Project will help you with process. It doesn't help you with people. And so I just found myself gravitating more to that. And I found more and more in my classes that I teach in project management, I would get questions on how do you handle this person or that person. And that's what led to the second book that I wrote, which was really about the people side of managing projects. So I still appreciate the math. I love doing the math. I just did a class the last 2 days. And I love chapter 6 because that's the chapter where we do all our math, and I love it. But the hard questions really are about the people side of things and how do you handle situations with people? How do you handle bad team members? How do you engage them and get them to be on board? So I just found myself loving that side of things, even though I'll tell you a quick story. I was talking to somebody at Warner Brothers Pictures many years ago over lunch, and we were trying to obviously sell them our services. And so I introduced myself and we're having lunch together. And I'm on my soapbox about how people matter. And he stopped me. He said, wait a minute. He said, I thought you were an engineer. I said, I am. He goes, what is all this touchy-feely people stuff? Right? So until people don't do project work, then I'm going to have to be a touchy-feely people person because people do projects. And I can't be successful if they don't have what they need to be successful. So anyway.
Well, I think a great follow-on question to that is, after you got that degree, similar to that story you just shared, you started to observe in your work that many projects were failing due to poor communication. How did this observation then lead you to go down this path for having a huge passion of providing clarity through what I see are intentional conversations that people have?
It's never failed to amaze me how you can have a conversation with someone and do you think they're completely understanding what you're saying? And then they walk away with a completely different take on what it is you're saying, right? One of my favorite quotes is by George Bernard Shaw, which says, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So when I was doing some research for the second book, I looked up the definition of communication and realized that it's not the same thing as a conversation. Communication can be a one-way dialogue, posting on Slack, posting on Jira, sending a Teams message, sending an email, leaving a voicemail. Those are one-way communications. And what I found is beneficial is when you have a conversation. To put this into perspective, when you were a kid, if you ever played the game telephone, right? With telephone, if you don't know the game, I think sometimes it's called Chinese whispers, but if you don't know the game, basically somebody has a secret. They tell it to somebody else, the next kid in line, who then whispers it to the next kid in line. And it goes on down through 5 or 6 or 7 people. And the fun of the game is that what the last person says is not remotely close to what the first person whispered. It is, which is fun, right? It's very funny. The problem we have is that same dynamic plays out in the business world, except now people's livelihoods are impacted. Raises are not gotten. Your job promotions aren't had because of the fact that the message was misunderstood. And so what happens is I'm a leader. I think I've written the perfect email that clearly, succinctly says exactly what I want you to go do. I post it, and then nobody asked me any questions. So I assume you got it. And then I find out you went in the wrong direction according to what I wanted. So to me, what helped solve that problem would have also solved the game telephone, which would have made it not as much fun, is if you ask clarifying questions. So now what happens is when the first person says something to the second person, so the leader says, here's my message. If the recipient of that message can look back and say, well, okay, can you help me understand, what does it mean? How are you defining this term, right? Because sometimes we hear a message, we hear it through our filter, through our biases, through the way we define terms. Frankly, we even hear it through the kind of date we're having. How many times have you received a text message or an email and you just got fired up because you were mad that you sat on it overnight and realized, hey, they didn't really mean it that way because you're just having a bad day. You heard it through that filter. And if I can have a conversation where I'm able to ask you clarifying questions, like when you say you want to turn left, do you mean like right now at the stop sign or at that major intersection up there? Where am I turning left? And by asking those clarifying questions, which I call a dialogue, by having a dialogue, I'm able to receive the message the way you intended it. And when I pass it on to the next person, they can ask clarifying questions. And that way the message gets through completely and doesn't get mangled along the way.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to share a couple other thoughts on this. I think the other thing we fail to take into account oftentimes, because so many businesses today are global, is the cultures in other parts of the world. And I got my first real introduction to this when I was working for a company called Lendlease, and we were doing all these construction projects around the world. And I remember being in China, and we were talking to a group of people in Shanghai about this project that we were wanting to implement to change the way that we were doing safety around the construction projects. And I remember we were sitting there, and during the entire meeting, all the Chinese executives who were there were all shaking their heads in approval. And what I failed to understand until later on was that when they were shaking their heads and nodding yes, it means that they understood what we were saying. It didn't mean that they were going to comply with anything that we had to say. And that was a custom that I found not only there, but in other parts of Asia as well. And the second real wake-up call for me when I was at Lendlease is I was working for the chief information officer, this great guy named Jay Skabinski, and he wanted to do some of these radical changes to the way that the company had operated in the past. And so we were starting this large project, and we had this meeting with all the different executives worldwide. It was an in-person session. He asked them to raise any objections they had. There were not very many, etc. And we came out of the meeting, and he became a great mentor to me. And he said, John, one of the most important lessons I want to teach you is that people speak with their feet. And he goes, over the next couple weeks, I don't want you to observe what they're saying out loud. I want you to start observing their actions about their commitment to doing the project. And he was absolutely right, because we saw, although everyone was saying, yes, we need to do it, about 75% of the people who were saying yes were doing actions that were really in 180 degrees, voicing their disapproval for wanting to do what this was going to enact. So I think those are important things that happen so often in the business world that people say they're on board and they're completely not.
I think that's good. I had a similar experience in Japan, which is a country that I absolutely adore and love. And one of the first projects I was working on there, very exact thing that you're describing. I'm talking to somebody, they're nodding off, it seemed to be agreement. They keep saying hi, which I'm assuming means I'm 100% on board. I hear what you're saying, totally agree. And then later somebody said, no, hi means exactly what you said. I understand you're speaking words and I understand those words, but it doesn't mean I agree with you, right? So that's just an eye-opening experience. And the other one that I learned when I was there was they would say, that will be difficult, which is their way of saying that ain't never going to happen. But they're not confrontational and they don't want to say no. So they just say, that will be difficult. And so you learn as you go through different cultures. One of my colleagues spent a couple of years in Mexico, and he likes to tell the story of he was talking to one of his coworkers, and the guy said mañana, which I believe the literal translation of mañana is tomorrow. And so the next day it happened and still the work wasn't done. And the guy said mañana. And after a couple of weeks went by, somebody finally said, look, mañana doesn't mean tomorrow. It just means not today. And so he just lost the translation.
Oh, no, I was stationed in Spain as one of my first duty stations. And we were wanting to get this work done on this house that we had. And our landlord was Spanish. And every time we would ask him for something, it was mañana. Well, mañana meant we'll get it done in the next 2 months.
But not today.
But not today. You Americans worry about stuff too much.
Exactly.
So one of the things I picked up in my research is that you really emphasize the importance of up close and personal conversations in order to break down silos and to foster cross-functional teamwork. How has this approach become a foundational element of your project management methodology?
So we work on some pretty large global projects. I've been fortunate enough in my career to work on close to, I think, approaching about 30 worldwide sporting events for Coca-Cola. I planned all of the Olympic summer and winter since 1994. Started with the 96 Olympic Games. We started planning about 2 years in advance. And all the FIFA World Cup since 1998. So these major global sporting events. Also some really large projects for Caterpillar and some other clients. And what we found is even a project that takes 2 years and is geographically dispersed, the team members are literally all over the globe. If we can get people together face to face for just as little as 3 or 4 days, the bonds that we form over those 3 or 4 days allow us to run the next 22 months, 23 months remotely. And what I mean by that, to put it in perspective, there's a wonderful book by John Katzenbach. I think it's called Wisdom of Teams. Yeah, Wisdom of Teams. And in that book, when I was reading it, what he talks about is how do you take a group of individuals in my world who've been assigned to a project and actually have them work as a cohesive team? And the finding really was you got to put a structure in place within which people begin to feel accountable to each other, not just to the boss, but to each other. So my experience with that has been, and the way that I verbalize that based on my 30 years of doing this, I need to change you, John, from an email address into a living, breathing human being to a jocular connection. Let's say that you and I worked together for 6 or 7 years at the company. And I just know you as John at actionable.com. And when I finish my task, I send it over to you and you do some things to it and magic, and the project finishes, company makes money, everybody's really happy. And so this particular time, of course, you're not the only project I'm working on. I'm working on 5 or 6 different projects. And this week, it's Friday, it's 8 o'clock at night. I've already put in 60 hours this week. I'm tired and I haven't gotten to your task yet. And I don't really frankly feel bad because I did 60 hours this week. I did more than my fair share. So I'm going to go have dinner with the kids and that's it. So Wednesday of next week, when I finally get around to doing your task, I finish it, send it off to you with a note. Hey, sorry, this is late. It was a really bad week last week. Hope all's well. And I email it to you. And all I know is you did your magic. The project got launched and the company made money. Everybody was happy. But what I find is when we come face to face, I get to meet you. Hey, John, nice to meet you. Nice to put a name with a face. How are you? And we start talking, and over the breakfast or over a lunch or a coffee break or over a team dinner, I get to learn who John Miles really is. I get to learn about your background in the Navy. I get to learn about you have 3 kids, I have 3 kids, your kids do this and my kids do that. And I start to form a connection with you. And then what happens is we go back into the planning session, and I don't want to get too much technical jargon, but there's a set of activities that are important called the critical path. And if they're late, the project's late. And I see that I'm on that as well as your task. And I say, well, John, something is wrong because I know for a fact that task I've been late with in the past and it didn't stop the project. And you say, well, Clint, you're right. But the connection is right. The problem is, he says, last time I remember vividly, you were 3 days late when you gave it to me. He says, and I had to work 2 weekends in a row to make up for that. And I'm going to tell you, I know Clint's 5 letters, but in my household, you were a 4-letter word for those 2 weekends. Because I had to miss this big event in my kids' lives. I couldn't go to the soccer game. I couldn't go to this recital, all because I was trying to make up for you giving it to me late because I knew I couldn't afford to give it to the next person late. So now I start to feel bad. Nothing has changed. I'm still going to go back to my office. You're still going to be john@actionable.com, except for the fact that now I have formed and established a bond with you. I hold myself accountable to make sure that I get my stuff done because I wouldn't want somebody else calling me to miss a big event in my kid's life. So what we find is having people come face to face, even for just as short as 3 days. And this is not replicable via Zoom because, as you pointed out, people work with their feet. Even on a Zoom call, even if I've got you online, which half the time I don't, I've just got your picture up, but I can't really tell. I just see your face. I can't necessarily see that you got your arms crossed and you're mad about something. I see that you're looking down while you're taking notes, answering an email from your colleague, writing a PowerPoint for your boss. I can't really see all that. I can't see the body language. And I miss all of those nonverbal cues So by having those conversations face to face, I have access to all of that information. Not only that, but I also have the ability now to form that bond with you, that conversation you have to have, and now begin to put, it's not just John, it's John with 3 kids. Like I have 3 kids, and it's my importance that I care about now deeply, that I formed some kind of a connection with. I interviewed Dr. Sherry Turkle once for the podcast, and she's written 6 or 7 books. She's a New York Times bestseller. I think the one that was thinking about is Reclaimed Conversations. She's a professor at MIT. She's a fantastic woman, clinical psychologist. And she writes on empathy. And in one of the books that I was reading, there was a study done by some Japanese researchers. And what they found was, I've always heard this, what eyes are the windows to the soul. And the research actually backs that up. And what they found was when people are face to face and they make eye contact, there's some chemical reactions of bond that starts to form. And so when I was interviewing her, she was laughing and she said, Clint, to mimic that, I'm tricking you right now by making you think we're bonding because I'm looking at the camera. So it looks like I'm looking right at you. She goes, but unfortunately, you're down here. I can't see you at all. And so there are those things that happen when we're face to face that it's an investment of 2 or 3 days, but it gives us the ability of executing long, difficult projects, even when we're spread across the world. We can do the rest of it remote as long as we form that basis up front.
I've seen that play out so many times, especially when I was starting to do the work with Indian outsourcers or outsourcing in other countries. It meant so much to get that lead who you're going to have from that company to come and meet with you face to face so that you had that rapport, understood more about them. And when you had heated discussions, you always had a common base that you both could go back to that would help to diffuse anything that might come up. So, Clint, I want to talk about your book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment. And in it, one of the core things that you discuss is managing by commitment rather than micromanagement. How does this intentional approach to leadership foster trust and accountability within teams?
So I'm glad you asked that question. So I think one of the interesting things for me is when I work with a new team, and you can see the trepidation on their face when they walk in the room, the project management. Just one more way for the man to keep me down, right? My boss is going to use this to micromanage what I'm doing. Tell me that from 8 o'clock to 8:10, I should be doing that. If from 8:10 to 8:25, I should be doing that. And they just want to run straight from the room. Another reason I think people don't like to do traditional project management is their whole life experience is that project management is punitive. And what's happened is that organization has used project management as a club to beat people over the head with, which is not what, to me, a project should be about. To me, project management should be inclusive, should be collaborative, it should be helpful. And the way we do that is, so I'll tell a quick story. So basically, what ends up happening is somebody would tell me, I hate project management. Because I said, well, why do you hate it? And here's what they describe. Because what happens is the project manager sits off to save me time, he says. He's going to go build a plan without me. Just because he knows how it all goes together. I don't need to be bothered by that, so I can really do my work. He says, then the guy laughs and says, but the unfortunate piece is he doesn't know what I do. And apparently he used a random number generator for the durations because those aren't remotely close to what it's going to take me to get it done. Then he publishes the schedule without my input and then complains to my boss and I'm not getting it done. Well, if that's how project work is done, I'm going to run screaming from the room as well. So the approach that we take, what we do is the team builds their plan for their project. I've worked on so many global events. There's probably nobody in the world that knows more about how Coca-Cola plans and executes an Olympic event than I do, because I've worked on so many of them in my career. If not the number one, I'm probably in the top 2 or 3. I also worked in Brazil on the FIFA World Cup. So I knew the people, the processes, the culture. So and that was 2014. They got the 2016 Summer Olympics. So I probably could have gone off by myself in a vacuum and built a pretty solid plan for the Rio 2016 Olympics, based on my understanding of what happened on the FIFA World Cup in Brazil, plus the understanding overall knowledge of Olympics planning. But that would never have worked because my name isn't attached to all the tasks. That belongs to other people on the team. So also the people can change, skill sets change, regulatory things can change. So what we find is even if you know a lot about the project as a project manager, you should involve the team and let the team build their plan for their project. Because at the end of the day, most of the world today works in a matrix organization, which means I have no control over the people on my team. They don't report to me for their job, for their pay raises, for their job reviews. That's their functional manager. And they're dotted line to my project and 5 or 6 other projects. So not only do I not control the people on my team, I can't force them to do the work. I'm competing for their time with multiple other projects. The only shot I've got to be successful in that scenario, which is how most of the world works, is that they hold themselves accountable. And the way that I find we hold ourselves accountable is if you remove all the obstacles that people can hide behind, that would include things like, so some of our rules of engagement would be, for you to be assigned to a task, you must be physically in the room or on the team's call and say, that's my task and I own it. Because that's you're taking acceptance of that task and therefore you're taking accountability for it and ownership of it. And then you are the only person who can tell me the duration. You tell me how long you need because you're the only person who knows all the different ins and outs of the projects you're working on, your personal life, whether you can work late on a weekend or not, whether you've got the kids this week or not. Only you know that. I don't know that from the outside. Only you have that information. And then only you could tell me the things you need to do your work. So it's not just enough to say that's my task. It's going to take me 2 weeks. I also need to know, okay, what do you need from other people before this 2 weeks can start? And by building our plans in a collaborative way, and by having the individual tell me what activities belong to them, how long they need, and what they need from other people, 2 things happen. First of all, they own that activity. They're going to start to hold themselves accountable to delivering that activity because that's when they promised it to me. And I find most people want to live up to what they say. I'm sure we get some bad team members every now and then, but the majority of the people that I've dealt with in my 30 plus years doing this, people want to come to work and do a good job and go home at night feeling they did a good job. So they want to do the work. They want to live up to what they have to say, what they promised you. The other thing that's magical about having people collaborate together and build these plans is they get a much deeper understanding, and not only of their piece of it, but how they fit into the overall plan. And they begin to see that I didn't realize that if this was late, it actually was going to affect 5 other people. Only one of them is going to push the project out. But the other 4 people are also having an impact on their work. I didn't realize that. I didn't understand. Or now I'm able to communicate to the people that I'm getting information from why this piece of information is so important and how that I use it. And if that's causing a conflict, we can discuss about how I might get an early piece of information that I can work with. So to me, those are really the keys is collaboration and having those face-to-face conversations and why it's so important.
I'm just going to ad-lib here a little bit. One of my most interesting roles that I had as an executive was when I was at Lowe's. I took over 3 functions that you would seem would be separate, but actually were very interrelated. I was in charge of all data, so the chief data officer, integration, and testing of all the IT that we were doing. And when you start thinking about those functions, they cut across any single initiative that you want to accomplish at Lowe's. And one of the things that used to drive me crazy is the project managers would come in and they'd start slicing people up in 5% of their time, 10% of their time. We're going to put them 2 hours here, 2 hours here. And in reality, that just never works. That's not how people focus on things, is in that way. Have you run across that type of scenario, and how do you deal with it, and what do you recommend?
So what you're describing, I totally get. And there are really 2 philosophies, I think. One is what I call resource driven, which is what you were describing, in that we're going to allocate this person for X percentage of their time and that person for Y percentage of their time. And the challenge I think you have in project work with doing that is the number of staff hours required and the duration of the activity are quite different. The example that I like to give, no matter what world you live in, you probably understand this, is changing the oil in your car. If I go out on Monday morning and I spend 1 hour, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, and I take the oil plug out, I take the oil filter out and let all the oil drain, and I come back Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock and I spend 1 hour, I put the plug back in, I put a new filter on, fill it back up with oil. The staff hours on that is 2 hours. So if I was billing my time back against projects, if I'm in IT, I'd be billing 2 hours. The problem with that is what that doesn't tell me is when can I drive my car? It's not after 2 hours. It's after it's at the end of day 5. If I started Monday morning and finished Friday afternoon, that's 5 days. 5 days have elapsed. And I can drive the car, pick up the kids, go to the grocery, go to get the dry cleaning. All of those things start at the end of day 5. not after 2 hours. So 2 hours is important for some kind of resource balancing. From project work, Joe doesn't care it takes you 2 hours. Joe just wants to know, can I start my task on Thursday or Friday? Which is it? And that's why the duration piece is so important. So we put that back on the team members who say, that's my task. The first question I ask them is, how long is it going to take you based on your workload? So I don't want you to assume 100% availability because you probably aren't. So thinking about all the other projects you're working on, plus your day job, because almost nobody got hired into the company to do projects. They got hired for a function. And oh, by the way, project work is just something to get thrown on. So taking all that into account, how long will this task take you? And then if I want to look at resources and look at resource leveling, then I can also ask a second question, which is, what are the staff hours on this? And then I can look at resource plans, but I can manage complex projects without ever looking at the hours. It's really more about commitment of durations.
Well, thank you for giving us that insight. And I wanted to go back to the Olympics, given that we've got the Olympics coming up here in the very near future. When you think of someplace like you were talking about Brazil for the Olympics, we're talking about Paris. Since you're probably knee deep in this right now, what are some of the things that go into planning for an Olympics that listeners might not even be thinking about that become complications that have to be overcome?
Well, everyone is unique and different. So I will say that and everyone has their own philosophy or legacy they want to leave. Whether you want to be the most sustainable one or the most user-friendly one or most accessible one. And I will say that over the years, everyone is just, it gets to be different and not, I don't, maybe better is not the right word, but it's different and unique on each one. And to be clear, I'm only doing one of the major sponsors activation of these events. I'm not building facilities and things like that. I think that if you're one of the major sponsors, if you're one of the inside of the stadium, then you're trying to get your brand across. You're trying to make sure people are drinking your product and see your brand everywhere. That's probably something people do realize, but there's a lot that goes into it before that. Like, how do we make sure that the product is cold? Because if you're doing a FIFA World Cup, which is a little different than the Olympics, if you're a soccer fan, that those people stay in the bowl, halftime comes, everybody leaves and wants to get something to drink and come back in and sit down. So you better have all your stuff pre-chilled. And that's on top of the marketing programs that go into place, the regulatory items you have to make sure are checked off. So it's actually funny because I think the way I describe it is like having a party at your house. It's just, the only thing that's different is scale, right? If you're having a party at your house, you have to send out invitations, which we might call tickets. You have to get an RSVP list, how many products to go buy. You've got to make sure your products are cold in advance so that the beer is not hot, trying to cool off for the last second. The wine is not hot, trying to cool off for the last second. You've got, am I going to invite my boss or not? So there's a political piece involved. Really, the only difference is your parties probably don't last 17 days like the Olympics do. If they do, please invite me. I would love to see one of these. And they probably don't have tens of thousands of people attend. Again, if you do, let me know. I'd love to come to one of those. So, but it's just scale. It's much like planning on a party you're having at your house, but it's just the scale is clearly much, much larger.
I've always thought watching these things from afar, it's so interesting how 18 months before the event is supposed to be held, they are so far behind on creating stadiums and other venues that they need to. And miraculously, I'm not sure how some of these countries pull it off, because to me, I guess they're throwing a lot of people and money at it.
Well, from a stadium perspective, I think I've seen this happen in some countries. And again, that's not the part that I work on, but you think about project work as time, cost, and quality. And so the way that they pull it off at the end is sacrifice quality and increase cost. So they'll get it done. So the country might finish at a hotel or a stadium or whatever. And I don't think I'm telling any secrets here, but I remember being on one of the projects and they were building a new soccer stadium. And we got into it the week before to put our equipment in, only to discover that the concession stands were not big enough to hold the equipment. So here we are 1 week, literally a week before the event. We've got to erect temporary stands. We've got to get permission to run extension cords through the ceiling, plug into the back, all because they weren't sized properly. But what ends up happening is, and again, this is from our client perspective, they don't have any control over that. It's just, we're going to move in, put our product in place, be ready to go whenever you tell us we can go. And so those are the kind of challenges. So what happens is it costs extra money because we had to create temporary stands. And of course, it adds a lot of stress to your life.
It certainly does. That is for sure. Clint, one of the things that is playing out right now on a global scale is Gallup is reporting that somewhere between 7 to 8 employees are disengaged and feel unfulfilled at work. What do you think are some of the things that are at the root cause of this? And how does an intentional approach to leadership help to create more engaging work environments?
So it's actually a little disheartening to hear it's that high. I'm not surprised though. I'm a big face-to-face guy, so I probably land on the side of the argument of people should be more in the office than away. But I can certainly see that if I'm coming out of the place where I got to work fully remote from home for multiple years and productivity was the same, why am I having to come back into the office? So that may be leading to some of the unrest, if you will. So to me, you got to strike that balance. And I think that's, you don't have to be in the office every day. I think that ship has sailed. There's no reason to come into the office from 9 to 5 exactly every day. But I think there are times when face-to-face contact is helpful. So I think maybe that's every Tuesday, Wednesday, if you go in the office. I don't know what that is for your organization, but there needs to be some amount of face time, because what we've also found is when you're fully remote, you tend to be isolated. And Zoom calls don't take the place of actual conversations, because I'm not going to be on a Zoom call with 25 people and be able to have a sidebar conversation with my colleague, because that means everybody can hear it as opposed to me just having the conversation with them. There are some things that happen that you really only get from the impromptu discussions that happen when you run into somebody at a coffee machine, right? So I think there is some of that that has to come into play. As far as other things, I think it's a matter of trying to understand where people are. If they are going to remain remote, then, which I think is okay as well. I even take more ownership as a leader of that call to make sure, because I see this happen all the time. We'll have a Zoom call and there'll be 10 people in the room and 4 people joining remotely. And of course, people in the room drive the conversation. At the very end, you look over and goes, "So Clint, what do you think?" And I'm like, "Well, all the good ideas are gone because I couldn't chime in because I was muted on the call." So now the intentional thing would be to look over and say, "Hey, let's start off with our remote participants and try to get their input first so that they actually feel like they're part of it." Because what we find is if you're fully remote, then you do tend to fall off and you do tend to feel isolated. So that could be something that's driving that as well. And the other thing is just trying to understand who they are and where they are in their life. And it's more than just project work. And it's going to sound cavalier, but it's not to me. It should be sincere. It's, "John, how are you doing? I mean, what's going on in your world? Let's talk about your kids for a minute." And really try to get that engagement from them so they do feel like they are part of a company as opposed to this 1099 contractor out here by my house on my own with no support.
Yeah, and I think that's going to become more paramount in the future because, as you and I discussed in our episode, I really believe more and more people are going to become individual entrepreneurs where they're serving multiple clients. And so they need to have that emotional investment to feel like they're part of the team. And that leads to my next question. What intentional practices can leaders implement to maximize that emotional investment of their teams in the projects? Because I think that investment is part of the reason projects fail or not. You've got to get that culture of people invested in getting this thing out to fruition.
So I think if I had to pick one single thing from a project perspective, at least, it would be that a leader has the ability to listen and to actually hear. So it's one, if I can work with a team and show you something, prove to you that it can't be done. And if your attitude is, "I don't care what that says to make it happen," then we're not going to be successful. Also, if you shoot the messenger, if I have bad news and you've created an environment in which the truth is not acceptable, then you shoot me because I got the message, then I'm going to learn my lesson and I'm just going to be quiet next time. I remember being early in my career and I was actually observing in this particular planning session. My boss was leading, and then one of the guys a new guy was beside me who was with that company. They were looking at the critical path, and we take a break, and he walks out and he's shaking his head and he says, "That ain't never going to happen." And I said, "Well, why not?" He says, "Well, they're missing one of my tasks." And he says, "And the one they do have, it doesn't have enough time on it." I said, "Oh, well, we should go back and tell them." He goes, "Oh no." He says, "There's no way I'm doing that." And I said, "But why not?" He says, "Because I've worked with Joe before, and I know for a fact, if I give that news to Joe, Joe's going to make my life miserable for the next 6 months." He says, "What I'm going to do, I'm just going to sit here quietly. And in 6 months, when my task is supposed to be done, I'll announce I need 3 more weeks or another month. And like, there's also a missing task." So there are two people clearly at fault. One is the guy should have stood up and just taken the beating he didn't deserve, but he should have just been vocal. But the leader has created an environment where the truth is not acceptable. As a project manager, I know there's going to be bad news. If there's no bad news coming my way, then I know that one or two things has happened. Either people are not doing any work or they're hiding it from me, because there's bad news at every project. I often joke that we should call project management the theory of chaos, because projects are chaotic by nature. And I'm okay with the fact that things don't go well. As long as you tell me, and if you know something, I'm not bothered by bad news. I'm bothered by bad news that you've known about for months. And you kept hoping the miracle would occur and you figure it all out so that nobody had to know. Because now when you finally tell me we've lost 2 or 3 months worth of time we could have had to correct it, and now the only option I have left is usually pretty unpalatable. I'm doing something crazy like air freighting concrete block to a construction site to solve a problem, because you've removed my ability to solve. You give me a lot less time to fix the problem. So one is, I think, just creating an environment where people are willing to be truthful, where the truth is actually welcomed and not just beat the messenger, but also be willing to ask hard questions, but in the end, listen to what they're saying. I had a project once, I won't name the client, but they wanted to be the first major network to go all HD on their project, on their sends, everything in high definition. And we're planning the project in April, and the deadline they wanted was November of that year. And we did the math, we did the plan. We realized at the end of 3 days, we could not give them November, but the team could make April happen. And so we went back to the customer, internal customer, and said, hey, I know you wanted November, but here April's the best we can do. Here's why. Show them all the steps. And then they asked really hard questions, but they were good questions. Well, what if we gave you more people? And the answer was, well, it's not a people problem. It's a technology problem. It's a new equipment we need to be able to go to high def from what we have today. And there's only so much of it, and we're late to the game. There are other people in front of us. And they said, oh, it's a money problem. Here's money. See if you can buy somebody's place in line, which was ultimately not successful. They basically said, go to the back of the line where you belong. But in the end, the customer, while not thrilled with the fact they weren't going to get November, agreed and understood, hey, April is the best we can do. The team is working hard. They're not shirking their responsibility. They thought about it. They've really put a lot of effort into it. And I recognize that while it's not the answer that I wanted to hear, it is the correct answer, which is April. And let's go with April. And that was considered to be a successful project because the customer agreed to move the date to April because we did our due diligence. So I think for me, it's about creating an environment where the truth is acceptable, but then also listening to what you're told and not just saying, no, it can happen. Because the customer could have said all day long, it's November, and hung up the phone. And will we deliver it in November? No, because if you can't make it work on paper, you can't make it work in real life, because paper is easier. So if I can't get my schedule to show November, I'm never going to make it happen in real life.
I think one of the most important jobs a project manager's got to do is have thick skin and be proactive in calling things out that they're going into a yellow status to bring people's attention to the issues and that they need to be solved. What drives me nuts was when I would be on these steering committees looking at these projects, you knew after you've done hundreds of projects, the telltale signs that things aren't going the way they should. And yet the project is green and all of a sudden the whole thing is red and they're asking for money and more time. And to me, that is complete and utter project management 101 that should never happen.
Yeah, I think for me, it's interesting, the green. So one of the questions I always ask, is that a mathematical answer? Did you get that mathematically, or are you setting the color yourself? Because if you're setting the color yourself, I have a problem. I want it to be coded so that if it's X number of days late, it's yellow, and it's Y number of days late, it's red. Otherwise, you can game the system. And I think the other thing that I see a lot of problems with in companies companies tend to overlaunch in general. They tend to overpromise, overlaunch projects. And I always ask the question in my groups, so how many of you work in a multi-product environment? And almost everybody raised their hands. It's okay. Of all the projects that are currently on your plate, how many are considered top priority? And everybody laughs because every single one is considered top priority, which the true statement I can make about that is that none of them are. They're all the same priority. So one of the challenges that I see organizations have that they could certainly do better at and solve a lot of issues is truly prioritizing the projects and saying, this is our number one, this is our number two, this is our number three. Supply the resources needed to number one first, and then go to number two. Because if you take the attitude, they're all top priority, they're all the same priority.
Absolutely true. Well, I'm going to just share another story from my time at Lowe's. I remember I was promoted to take on all software development for the company. And I started talking to some of the executives in the business to understand how people felt about the function. And I will never forget this discussion that I had with Scott Butterfield, who at the time was the head of corporate strategy. And he said, John, you guys are absolutely fantastic at delivering projects that by the time they're delivered are completely useless. And this leads me to asking you, one of the most difficult things, I think, whether you're a project manager or just in a company, is how to recognize when to let go of projects that are going to be unsuccessful. How do you recommend leaders be intentional about identifying and making these tough decisions?
That's a good one. I think that what ends up happening is, as a team starts working on a project, we get invested, right? We got our blood, sweat, and tears. We've lost sleep at night on this project. We worked much of weekends on this project. And so the last thing we want to hear is, hey, we shouldn't be doing this project anymore. And I've seen this happen many times, and the team would say, let's say the customer for this particular piece of one of the clients I work with is semiconductors. And let's say the customer for that chip is changed their mind and it's no longer an option for us. There'll be some people on the team who will say, well, let's just go ahead and finish it and just put it on the shelf so we can use it later. What they're really saying is, I don't want to feel like I wasted 6 months of my life. But that's not the right answer, because if you look at it, why would I want to spend another 4 or 5 months finishing this project for which we know there's no customer now? Instead, because that's just throwing bad resources after good. So let's just put that on the shelf, table it for now, and we can always pick it back up in the future if we find another customer, and we'll start from there. But it is hard. It is really hard to give up on a project that shouldn't be given up on. And so one of the things that we like to do is we have a document called a project charter. And in that charter, there's usually some kind of financial benefit to doing the project. What is the gain from this project? And once your customer goes away, you can see the gain is now zero. And you can see the burn rate for the employees involved and what the cost of the project is. It becomes a very transparent mathematics exercise. It says, if we continue this project, we are losing X amount of dollars per month. Because in this team, we have 5 other projects, by the way, that are behind. I could really use these people on that project or those projects to make sure that they are successful. And it's just, it's hard, but the math says we should do it. And so you have to try to, I think, soften the blow to the people who've invested that time and just let them know, hey, this is not wasted effort. The first thing I'm going to say is I just wasted 6 months of my life. We've gotten 6 months of really good work here. We've got some good intellectual property developed. We're just going to put it on the shelf until we need it. And let's take these excellent talents you have. Let's move them away to these other projects that are running behind so we can get those back on track so we can deliver those successfully and get the revenue that we need and the profit we need to move forward. So it's hard, but you have to do it.
Well, thank you so much for that, Clint. And lastly, where can someone go to learn more about you and your company?
Well, you can look us up at projectsuccess.com. My books are on Amazon. You can also reach me on my website at clintpadgett.com.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such an honor to have you on Passion Struck.
Thanks so much for having me, John. It was great.
What an incredible interview that was with Clint Padgett, and I wanted to thank Clint, Zilker Media, and Forbes Books for the honor and privilege of having him appear on today's show. You're about to hear a preview of the Passion Struck podcast interview that I did with Shalini Sharma, a leading math learning expert and CEO who's on a mission to show that math is for everyone. Shalini's new book, Math Mind, The Simple Path to Loving Math, debunks myths about math and highlights its beauty and creativity. Join us as we explore how math can enhance problem-solving skills, create career opportunities, and engage us fully in the digital world.
When children can't read, we get mad at the adults. And when children can't solve math problems, we don't get mad at the adults. We just absolve the children of building a math mind. And we think adults pushing on it are being mean to the kids, right? That's so weird. And I think we should have much higher expectations of the adults.
The fee for the show is that you share it with family or friends when you find something useful or interesting. If you know someone who's really into project management or is looking for more leadership expertise, then definitely share the show with them. The greatest compliment that you can give us is to share the show with those that you love and care about. In the meantime, do your best to apply what you hear on the show so that you can live what you listen. Until next time, go out there and become passion struck.